This is an NBC News special report. Here's Peter Alexander.
Good day to you. We are coming on the air right now because officials from the Texas Department of Public Safety are giving a briefing as we speak on the latest in the investigation of that mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde that took the lives of 19 children and 2 teachers. It comes as the grief for so many families there is being compounded by both frustration and outrage amid growing questions about the police response, specifically the timeline and whether they waited too long, by some accounts up to an hour, before entering the classroom to stop the shooter. Let's listen.
As much information as we can on where we are on the investigation. We're here to report the facts as we know them now, not to defend what was done or to criticize what was done or the actions taken. I'll begin first and foremost with the timeline as we know it. The second timeline I'll discuss is the 911 timeline. Then we'll talk about the relevant social or digital media footprint of the subject. Then we'll also have plenty of time for questions at that point. At 11:27, we know from video evidence, at 11:27, the exterior door suspected of where we knew the shooter entered, Ramos, was propped open by a teacher. 11:28, the suspect vehicle crashes into the ditch, as previously described. The teacher runs to the room 132 to retrieve a phone, and that same teacher walks back to the exit door, and door remains propped open. There were 2 males, as reported by Regional Director Escalon yesterday. There were 2 males at a funeral home that when they heard the crash, they went to the crash scene. When they arrived at the crash scene, before they got there, they saw a man with a gun exit the passenger side with a backpack, and they immediately began running. Ramos began shooting at him. Did not hit him. One of the males fell when he was running. Both males returned to the funeral home while they're running. And then again, we see through video, teacher reemerges inside the school in panic and apparently calls 911. 911 call at 11:30. There was a crash, man with a gun. 11:31, the suspect reaches last row of vehicles in the school parking lot. 11:31, the suspect shooting began at the school while patrol vehicles got to the funeral home. I'll point out where it is. Crashed vehicles over here. Suspect was hiding behind a vehicle, started walking down, shooting into the classroom. There was discussion early on that an ISD, Consolidated ISD for Uvalde, was a resource officer and had confronted the suspect. That did not happen, as R.D. Escalon talked about yesterday. It was certainly stated in preliminary interviews, but often these preliminary interviews and a cursory walkthrough doesn't reveal the type of information, and certainly, police officers, like anyone else, under stress, sometimes witnesses get it wrong. But the bottom line is that officer was not on scene, not on campus, but had heard the 911 call with a man with a gun, drove immediately to the area, sped to what he thought was the man with a gun, to the back of the school, what turned out to be a teacher, and not the suspect. In doing so, he drove right by the suspect, who was hunkered down behind a vehicle, where he began shooting at the school. At 11:31, the suspect shooting in between the vehicle is when it began, while patrol vehicle gets to the funeral home. Multiple shots are fired outside the school at 11:31. Patrol car accelerates into the parking lot, drives by the shooter. That's exactly what I was talking about. It was the ISD officer at that time. He passes, then leaves the camera view. There's multiple shots fired at the school at 11:32. At 11:32, 11:27, 11:32:36. And at 11:33 is when the suspect entered the school at the door that I'm pointing to now. At 11:33, the suspect begins shooting into room 111 or 112. It's not possible to determine from the video angle that we have at this point in time. We do know this, that he shot more than 100 rounds based on the audio evidence at that time, at least 100 rounds. He entered at 11:33, or 11:33 he started shooting in the classrooms, 111 and 112. And 11:35, 3 police officers entered the same door as the suspect entered. All 3 of those police officers worked for the Uvalde Police Department. They were later followed by another 4, a team of Uvalde police officers, 3, and also a county deputy sheriff. So a total of 7 officers were on the scene. The 3 initial police officers that arrived went directly to the door, and 2 received grazing wounds at that time from the suspect while the door was closed. At 11:37, there was more gunfire. Another 16 rounds was fired at 11:37. 1 at 11:37 and 16 seconds, 11:38, 11:40, 11:44. At 11:51, a police sergeant and USB agents started to arrive. At 12:03, officers continued to arrive in the hallway, and there were as many as 19 officers at that time in that hallway. At 12:15, we know that BORTAC members arrived. Not the entire BORTAC, but members of BORTAC, along with Shields. At 12:21, the suspect fired again, was believed to be at the door. At 11:21, law enforcement moved down the hallway. At 11:50, they breached the door using keys that they're able to get from the janitor, because both doors were locked. Though both of the classrooms that he shot into were locked when officers arrived. They killed the suspect at that time. And now I'd like to go over the 911 timeline. Which I warn you is not it's better that I read it than you listen to it. The caller identified, I'll not say her name, but she was in room 112, called 911 at 12:03. The duration of the call was 1 minute and 23 seconds. She identified herself and whispered she's in room 112. At 12:10, she called back in room 12, advised there multiple dead. 12:13, again she called on the phone. Again at 12:16, she called back and said there was 8 to 9 students alive. At 12:19, a 911 call was made, and another person in room 111 called. I will not say her name. She hung up when another student told her to hang up. At 12:21, you could hear over the 911 call that 3 shots were fired. At 12:36, 911 call, it lasted for 21 seconds. The initial caller called back, student, child, called back, was told to stay on the line and be very quiet. She told 911 that he shot the door. At approximately 12:43 and 12:47, she asked 911 to please send the police now. At 12:46, she said that she could hear the police next door. At 12:50, shots are fired. They can be heard over the 911 call. And at 12:51 is very loud and sounds like the officers are moving children out of the room. At that time, the first child that called was outside before the call cuts off. Additional information that we have is that there are 58 total magazines at the school related to the crime scene. 11 of those magazines were inside the school. 3 were on the suspect's body. 2 in room 112, 6 inside room 111. 5 were on the ground, 1 was in the rifle. There were 32 magazines outside the school, but on school property. 1 just outside the school building and 31 in the suspect's backpack that he did not take into the classrooms with him. There's 15 magazines at the crash site. There were 2 magazines at the suspect's residence for a total of 60 magazines. He had purchased and had a total of 1,657 total rounds of ammunition. 315 of those rounds were inside the school. 142 of those were spent cartridges. 173 were live rounds. 922 were outside of the school, but on school property. 22 of those were spent cartridges. 900 were live rounds. 422 were at the crash site. 22 were spent cartridges. 420 of those were live rounds. There's 35 spent law enforcement cartridges total in the school. 8 of those were in the hallway. 27 were inside the classroom. 111 where the suspect was killed. I had mentioned that I was going to go over quickly a digital timeline. One of the things we talked about early, and I want to correct something that was said early on in the investigation, is that he posted, okay, on Facebook publicly that he was going to kill it, that he was going to shoot his grandmother, and secondly after that he was going to, that he had shot her, and the third that he was going to go shoot up a school. That did not happen. It was actually on a message. It was a Facebook application, messenger application to somebody else that he had a conversation with. We know that through his digital media footprint, and I'll just do by date time, that Ramos asked his sister to help him buy a gun. She flatly refused. That was in September of 21. I'll avoid some of these and get to he had Instagram, a 4-group chat, and it was discussed that Ramos being a school shooter. That was on February 28th of 2022. On March 1st of 2022, there was an Instagram he had with 4 people. There was a chat. He discussed him buying a gun. On March 3rd, 2022, there was another 4-person chat. Quotations, word on the street is you are buying a gun. Ramos replied, just bought something. RN. On March 14th, and there's an Instagram posting by the subject, in quotations, 10 more days. A user replied, are you going to shoot up school or something? The subject replied, no, and stop asking dumb questions and you'll see. I know you have many questions, and I've agreed to stay as long as we can to answer as many of those questions as we can. If I can't answer it because we don't know definitively right now, I'll simply say that. And it continues to be a preliminary investigation. There's, literally, certainly over hundreds of interviews that have been conducted, will continue to be conducted, and there's thousands of leads that are being pursued, not consecutively, but concurrently, and thanks to our federal and local partners. And I do want to mention behind me, we've got the FBI Special Agent in charge. We also have an ATF Special Agent in charge, or ASAC, and of course, who else? What I got behind? Okay, Texas Rangers, if there's any specifics that I haven't covered that I might need their particular support on. I do want to cover one thing quickly, though, before I go to questions, and that's some of the questions that we have already received. And one of those is going around now that in fact, the subject had been one of the 2 arrested by the Texas Rangers and the local police back in 2018. That's not the case. He was not one of the individuals. In fact, we have found no links, associations, relationships in that investigation. Clearly it was a threat. It was back in 2018. The two juveniles were charged with attempted or conspiracy to commit capital murder. There's no question that we thought, and we had evidence, and certainly the district attorney agreed, that these juveniles, one 13, one 14 years old, was a threat to Uvalde. And there was a discussion at that time, even the senior year of the one that was 14 years old, which would make it 2022. However, that was not the subject. Questions? Oh, yeah. Oh, one thing I want to say, one thing I failed to say is that when we're done, we have Tony Pena with us. He's going to translate into Spanish, okay, what the answers and the questions are afterwards.
The microphone's otherwise attacked. Thank you for doing this, and I do hope you stay here and take as many questions as possible. You say there were 19 officers gathered in the hallway or somewhere. What efforts were made to try and break through that door? You say it was locked. What efforts was the officer making to try and break through either that door or another door to get inside that classroom?
None at that time.
Why?
The on-scene commander at the time believed that it had transitioned from an active shooter to a barricaded subject.
Sir, you have people who are alive, children who are calling 911 saying, please send the police. They are alive. In that classroom, there are lives that are at risk.
Hey, we're well aware of that.
Right, but yeah. Why was this made not to go in and rescue these children?
Again, the on-scene commander considered it a barricaded subject and that there was time and there were no more children at risk. Obviously, based upon the information we have, there were children in that classroom that were at risk, and it was, in fact, still an active shooter situation and not a barricaded subject. The question simply is this: it was a 40-minute gap. And if the 911 operators were aware that children were alive in that classroom, why weren't officers notified of that? And if that's the case, why didn't they take action? That's the question. And again, I'll go back to the answer for right now, is that it was considered, okay, the decision was made on the scene. I wasn't there, but at the same point in time, a decision was made that this was a barricaded subject situation. There was time to retrieve the keys and wait for a tactical team with the equipment to go ahead and breach the door and take on the subject at that point. That was the decision, that was the thought process at that particular point in time.
What can you tell parents that were here waiting and asking for the police to go in?
You doing apology for them?
Yeah, there was 19, like I said, there was 19 officers in there. In fact, there was plenty of officers to do whatever needed to be done, with one exception, is that the incident commander inside believed they needed more equipment and more officers to do a tactical breach at that point. That's why BORTAC was requested on the scene. As soon as they were there, they executed, they searched, or at least a dynamic entry, and went in, and of course, that was not the 12th, that was not the 12th of December.
Were the family members tased or gassed in any way?
With the benefit of hindsight, stand by,
Were the family members tased or gassed in any way?
For the benefit of hindsight, where I'm sitting now, of course it was not the right decision. It was the wrong decision. There's no excuse for that. But again, I wasn't there, but I'm just telling you, from what we know, we believe there should have been an entry at that as soon as you can. Hey, when there's an active shooter, the rules change. It's no longer, okay, it's no longer a barricaded subject. We don't have time. You don't worry about outer perimeters. And by the way, Texas embraces active shooter training, active shooter certification, and that doctrine requires officers, we don't care what agency you're from, you don't have to have a leader on the scene. Every officer lines up, stacks up, goes and finds where those rounds are being fired at, and keeps shooting until the subject is dead, period.
Obviously, countries south of the border, it's very difficult to understand how the most powerful nation in the world, the citizens have access to high-end weapons, and this is happening over and over again. And now get I don't mean to one day quarterback with you guys, but questions. I'm going to keep this from happening again in the communities of Texas. And second, how did a big-year-old kid that works at Wendy's wage to buy a $5,000 weapon?
Well, after the last, he used a debit card first, but to your point, it's very expensive, and a debit card is not a credit card. It means he had money in the bank. So why and how is being looked at right now, and I'll tell you this, thousands of more leads are being looked at right now because we haven't answered all the questions. We haven't gotten into the why. Okay, we know the individual was also into cyber gaming in that regard, and group gaming in that regard. So we've got a lot of questions are out there, and we're seeking answers. But we've got an obligation. We'll continue to update you when we find something out. Hey,
The woman in the yes.
Questions. The first one is he said that Border Patrol had a special team on site and the local police did not allow them to go into the building. Can you elaborate why?
The Border Patrol agents, the BORTAC agents that were in the building, did line up. They're part of the 19 that I talked about, and the entry team, ultimately the entry team that went in. But I can tell you that they were told, just as any other officer was told, and others, even command staff that came on board, is that the incident commander at the time believed that in fact it was a barricaded subject, that we had time, there was no kids at risk.
Which agency? About having chats and group chats and talking to people. When wasn't he on the next radar? Nobody.
I wish he was, because then there's no question. And I'll say this right now: every time we have one of these, and there's copycats, okay? And we need the public, just like we did back in 2018. There was a public, okay, that came forward that we got 2 people that are about to shoot up a school or planned to shoot a school. It's imperative on the public, when you get something, just because it sounds like he's a nut, he may be a nut. But just because it sounds like, well, it's possible to do, he may be intended to do, as I've read the timeline based upon the chats that he had. So we need everyone, when we have a threat to life like that, to take it seriously and report it. Because ultimately, this is tragic. What do you tell the parents of 19 kids, or the families of two teachers? Yeah. Hey, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
To wait for tactical gear. By 12:15, you had at least 15 officers and shields on scene.
Yeah.
Yet you did not breach the door until 12:50.
Hey, like I've said it before, is that, well, first of all, when it comes to an active shooter, you don't have to wait on tactical gear. Plain and simple, you've got an obligation. What I know now, okay, absolutely, it was an active shooter, because you can transition. Keep in mind, in the doctrine, okay, of active shooters, you can transition from an active shooter situation to a barricaded subject, or a barricaded with hostage subject. But if shooting continues, and you have any reason to believe that there's individuals alive in there, you've got an obligation to move back to an active shooter posture, and that means everybody at the door.
Are you saying those children were no longer at risk when he barricaded himself?
Saying there were children alive in classroom 112, 8 to 9 children. Is that teacher, are those children still alive? And why was the school resource officer off campus? And did Uvalde SWAT respond to the scene?
Well, Uvalde has a part-time SWAT team, number one. The ISD's got, you know, they have limited officers. I think, what is it? Well, you got six. They got six. Yeah, yeah. The Consolidated Independent School District has 6 officers, and they didn't have one posted at that location. And someone said, "Hey, what do you tell the parents?" I mean, you know, bottom line is that, or someone talked about and said, when there's kids in the room, why wasn't there an entry? Because it was believed, like I said at the time, that the subject was stationary, barricaded. There was no risk to other children. Again, on retrospect, from where I'm sitting right now, clearly there was kids in the room. Clearly, okay, they're at risk. And oh, by the way, even when you go back to shooting, there may be kids that are injured. Okay, they may have been shot but injured, and it's important for life-saving purposes to immediately get there and render aid.
Sir,
Where was the resource officer? Why was he not on campus?
He was not on campus.
Why?
Well, again, we'll have all those answers down the road. Okay.
Sir, did those killers survive?
Lady in the board.
Hi, this is Univision Network. Thank you for doing this. Also, the community is expanding. What to live on a document is that the world can apologize to all those parents who are outside screaming, trying to get in. It's obvious that it was not under control. Their health would have been great. Some parents are able to get their children out of it. Not as a police officer, not as somebody that belongs to the government, but as a parent, as a human being. What do you say to those parents who are about to bury their children?
Well, first I want to say that the Consolidated Independent School District officers were there early. There was 4 of them, and they immediately began evacuating the school and did that throughout the process. So keep in mind, so that was going on. That's what do I say to the parents? I don't have anything to say to the parents other than what had happened. We're not here to defend what happened. We're here to report the facts so they have the facts.
Who was the
Were any of the family members gassed or tased outside the building?
I'm sorry? Oh, I don't have any information on that. Well, one second though. However, we did review what DPS officers arrived on the scene, what they did, and looked at those instances.
The blue.
You know the parents of the children who died are watching, and they're
Yes.
hearing you say that not everything that could possibly have been done as humanly fast as it could be done was done. Are they owed an apology from somebody, incident commander and the police department here?
If I thought it would help, I'd apologize. But let me say this. Hey, let me say this.
Hold on.
And when you go back to the timeline, again, I want to go back and I'm not defending anything, but you go back to the timeline. There was a barrage. Hundreds of rounds were pumped in 4 minutes, okay, into those 2 classrooms. Then anything else, any firing afterwards was sporadic, and it was at the door. So the belief is that there may not be anybody living anymore, and that the subject is now trying to keep law enforcement at bay or entice them to come in to suicide by contact. I understand it. I reported that.
Why did they don't yell over your colleagues, please?
I'm Jack Roberts from the New York Post. Can I ask 2 questions? First of all, exactly how is the government barricading these rooms? Is it just a simple matter of him locking the door behind him? And secondly, why all 1,657 crowds crowd back into that?
Well, I'd like to answer the first one, but the why on the second one I don't have. The first one, that each door can lock from the inside, and both doors were locked, okay, from the inside. So the subject, when he went in, he locked the door. He came out one time into the hallway, went back in and locked the door, because at the time that the officers went in, both doors were locked. They got a key from the janitor and used it.
You said the first call came in inside the classroom at 12:03 and you breached it at 12:51. How many students died in those 48 minutes?
I don't have that answer. We're looking at it right now.
Hold on. Good.
Why was it so placed on lockdown? 2, while this may be the most
Yeah, thanks a lot. You know, forget how I'm doing. What about the parents? Those children. And forget about me. Not me or officers and stuff like that. We take an oath to uphold the law and protect people. And anytime something tragic like that, we want to know why it happened and if we can do better next time, is the bottom line. And call it like it is. It is tragic. Quite frankly, I mean, there shouldn't be anybody. You know, ideally, we've been able to identify this guy as a suspect and address it before he even thought about attacking, you know, on the 24th.
Go ahead. Go here.
There's a lot of ammunition, a lot of rounds. Are there other people that you're looking at to arrest? That 8 of them.
And we're looking at other people. Absolutely. Anybody who's been in contact, we're looking at anything. And links to associations. You know, people that may have known something and will continue and may have been involved in some chat room gaming along with them. So there's nobody that we're not going to talk to and look at. And it's certain, I can assure you that the district attorney is very proactive and very concerned about this. And that if any evidence that we bring to her that someone was an accomplice or an enabler or didn't do what they should have done, if it's in violation of the law and it meets the probable cause standards, I have no doubt that she'll take care of business just like she did back in 2018 when we had 2 juveniles plot a capital murder at the school.
You had 911 calls at 12:10, 12:13,
Yes.
12:16. The shooter wasn't killed until 12:50. Did any of those 911 callers survive?
Yes. I can't tell you that with certainty, but more than one survived.
How many children got
Sorry, what?
Can you give us an update on the number of officers injured, their condition, where they are now, and also were there any windows in the classroom?
Yes, the windows at the, I'll go backwards, right over here, I'll move over here. Something shot into these windows right here as he's approaching the door. Right? So the children were vulnerable all the time going through. We don't have any reporting of any of the children maybe injured but not dead the way he shot in this particular area. Right? As to the answer in terms of someone who could have shot opposite in that regard, I don't have the answer to that, quite frankly. But we're looking at a number of different things from ballistics and things like that you can do. Keep in mind, we've got children, okay, in here.
Come back to the mic.
We've got children in here. And we're looking at this from a tactical standpoint and everything in terms of looking backwards, okay? And certainly one of the things is, what was the access at 111 and 112 in that regard? And and also, you know, there's other access points as well.
Hold on.
Let me say one thing. One thing I didn't point out, okay, is that when we've got him going into these rooms, right here is the Jack and Jill restroom between. So not unlike Santa Fe, the classrooms are separated, but they're really connected. So you can move back and forth between those 2 classrooms.
In the green.
Yes, sir.
Was the incident commander receiving the information coming via the 911 call? And if so, why not? And if so, speak to the level of investigation that you're putting into that very question.
Yeah, well, that question will be answered, but I don't have I'm not going to share the information we have right now, because I don't have the detailed interview right now.
Go ahead, sir. Right there.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Was a barricade situation? Did any police officers go in and get their own kids while the parents were outside?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Right there. Go ahead.
Yes, please.
How many children called 911, and you know for a fact if any of those children died?
I know for 2 for certain did, and those 2 did not die.
And why was that propped open door still propped open even after the incident was occurring with shots being fired at the funeral home?
Bottom line is, we reported what happened. Is that back door was propped open. It wasn't supposed to be propped open. It was supposed to be locked. And certainly the teacher that went back for her cell phone, it propped it open again. So that was an access point that the subject used.
Do you believe that the teacher is
Go ahead, Blue. Go ahead. Hold on.
You have said in hindsight mistakes were made. A Democratic congressman is now calling for the FBI to investigate the response here.
Yeah.
Is going to be held accountable?
Well, first of all, we welcome the FBI. There's a reason why there's the FBI special agent in charge behind me right now. They play a vital role. And again, this is about finding facts and reporting facts as quick as we can. It's not about trying to defend, or it's not about trying to assess or even be hypercritical. It's about the facts and sharing whatever we learn on the facts as quick as we can and be as transparent as we can. You know, okay, the media, but more importantly, the parents and the public and the citizens of Uvalde and Texas.
Go ahead. Hold on. Sir, hold on.
Sir, who was the incident commander and has that...
The chief of police of the Consolidated Independent School District is the incident commander.
And has that person...
It's his school, he's the chief of police, okay?
Is he on scene?
Yeah, again, I'm not going to discuss disciplinary, but there's an ongoing criminal investigation. There's ongoing criminal investigation.
Is that teacher being investigated and working with rioters?
Again, I'm not going to get into that.
Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, Matt. The chief of police of Consolidated Independent School District. He was convinced, and again, I want to go back and say, he was convinced at the time that there was no more threat to the children, and that the subject was barricaded, and that they had time to organize with the proper equipment to go in. The subject already had hit, 3 officers, and hit 2 officers, and I didn't answer the final question. A third Border Patrol agent was grazed as well, but no police officer was seriously injured.
During that time, were the officers hearing shots fired inside that classroom during that time?
Yes. Yes, they did. He shot, and I went through the timeline before, where he continued to shoot, and periodically, sporadically.
So while they're waiting outside for the proper equipment, they're still
The last, I think I already gave you the timeline. I'm sure I went through it, but the last time that the shot right before the entry, okay, was he shot at 12:21. So.
At the officers or at the children?
No, not at the children. I'll tell you what, we don't know yet. We believe it was at the door, is what he fired at.
Go ahead, right there. Hold on.
What kind of equipment did law enforcement have in each specific moment of the response?
Hey, we know that beginning when the BORTAC agents arrived, they had 3 ballistic shields.
Give me the last question. What? Last question. Right here in the booth. Right here. Go ahead. Hold on.
I don't know. No, that's fine. Yeah, I'm going. Let's answer the question.
What do you think you should have done that you didn't?
I've already said that. I've already said. First of all, Texas embraces and teaches, the active shooter doctrine. The active shooter doctrine, as long as there's kids and as long as there's someone's firing, you go to the gun, you find them, you neutralize them, period. And there's only, there are some nuances with transition to a barricaded subject, and also transitioning to a hostage situation. And of course, the decision at the scene was that this is still a barricaded subject that did not go back to an active shooter situation.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Where is the police chief and why is he here to take our questions?
Well, because I'm here to address the latest timeline and facts that we know. You're certainly welcome to reach out to them.
I'd like to ask the FBI a question.
I defer to. You want to get the question?
Okay, hold on.
All right, then they'll see that. Fine.
How many children were pulled out?
Hold on, sir. Hold on.
Sir, you now been on the scene for several days. Or two things. What exactly is your role in this investigation? And viewing all this, given that the FBI goes through lengthy efforts to study active shooter situations like this, do you think this is something that requires an independent investigation by whether a federal agency, or by you guys, or someone else?
Thank you for the question. So my name is Oliver Rich. I'm the special agent in charge of the San Antonio division. First, I want to say I understand there are a lot of questions and there's a lot of frustration in the public, and our heart goes out to the families and the victims in this tragedy. I will say our role here remains the same. We are here to assist in this investigation, to provide the support to the community to the best of our ability. We've had 200 people here for over 4 days. We have people working all across the country to support this community and to support this investigation. We are continuing in that vein. We have victim specialists here working with people in the community, and we will continue to do that. If the facts bear out that there is a federal nexus, then the FBI will conduct an appropriate investigation at that time. But for now, we continue in this to support the Texas Rangers.
Is that something you guys would investigate? Okay, sir, are you going to ask?
How many more questions?
Two more questions.
Two more questions.
Guy in purple. Okay.
Yes.
Uvalde Police Department, Uvalde Police Department posted in February 2020 that they familiarized themselves with the school and they did the training to do just what they were supposed to do. How come they were not in leave, or their commanding officer was not in leave when they were familiarized with this training, and they should have done when they were posting on Facebook what they were doing? Who dropped the ball?
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that question.
President Biden will be here on Sunday. Your thoughts on that? Do you have a message for the president?
Yeah, welcome here. Welcome to Texas. This community's been hit hard. And I think it's noble that the president's going to be here to recognize the pain and suffering that this community is going through. And I think that's what leadership is. That's why Governor Abbott's here. That's why Lieutenant Governor, leaders go to where the problem is. And right now, the problem is in Uvalde, Texas.
We've been watching an update from the Texas Department of Public Safety about what took place there in Uvalde, Texas earlier this week. A stunning acknowledgement admitting a devastating failure of judgment that the on-scene commander treated the situation there as a barricaded subject and not an active shooter because they thought that no more children were at risk, even though at least 2 children, as was just explained to us, were calling 911 from inside the school, pleading for police to help them. The official saying, with the benefit of hindsight, clearly it was, in his words, the wrong decision. Justice correspondent Pete Williams has been watching this with us. And Pete, that may be the most crushing new detail we just learned, that it was not just the parents pleading for police to go in, but students inside the school who were doing the same.
Yes, and a question about whether the on-scene commander was aware of those 911 calls. What the head of the Texas Department of Public Safety said is they don't yet know the answer to that question. But we learned a lot of new detail out of this briefing about the movements of Salvador Ramos from the moment he crashed his car and climbed the fence, the fact that the exterior door to the school was propped open. Obviously, that shouldn't have happened. The fact that the door to the classroom, or this double classrooms, was either open or unlocked, allowing to get him. That's a violation of the Uvalde County School District's own security plan that said school district doors had to be locked, closed and locked at all times. The fact that there were actually 7, that he entered the school and that 3 minutes later there were 7 police officers in the building by 11:35, and as many as 19 police officers by 12:03, but as you say, the decision was made to stand by. Now, let me just say a little more about this notion that a situation with a person with a gun can switch from an active shooter situation to a barricade situation. I will just say that as a general matter, the reason that that is even something that occurs to police officers is that if they make the decision that there's no danger to people inside, they sometimes think that breaching, going in and confronting the shooter might cause the shooter to then lash out at whoever's left inside the building. That is apparently what went through the mind of the commander, unaware, as you say, of the fact that people were asking for help inside the classroom. And of course, it's always a difficult situation because you know that people have been injured, and the longer you wait, the more you raise the risk that people who are injured may die of their injuries if they don't receive medical treatment. So that's another thing that has to factor in, and I'm sure that this is going to be something that is long examined and debated. But we did learn a great deal of new information about why the decision was made to wait. We also heard, Peter, from some of these survivors, some of these young people that were there, that the doors to these classrooms had a window. And one of these students has said that the Ramos inside shot out the window. So I think that raises additional questions about why the officers on the scene were unable to try to engage him through that window. It may be, as we were told early on, that he was firing, he had this very high-powered weapon that is capable of shooting certainly through the classroom walls. We didn't hear much information about that. But that's an additional question. And then I think the other thing that is to be answered is the thinking seems to have been and seems still to be that the bulk of his shots were fired shortly after he went in. And that raises the question about when he was shooting at the school from outside in the parking lot, expending this enormous amount of ammunition that he had. Did he wound any students? Did he hurt any students or kill any students by firing at the school from outside? And when he went in, when he started shooting at classrooms as he sort of went down the hall, that's clearly information yet to be gathered. We had been told that victims were found in 4 classrooms. There wasn't any discussion of that today, but that could be the reason for that, Peter.
Yeah, no doubt. And as we understand it, when this shooter came in, he initially was shooting at one side of the building. When he ultimately entered, the classrooms he went into were on the other side. That may sort of explain some of the wider areas where they found these victims. I want to get to NBC's Morgan Chesky. He has been reporting from Uvalde all week. We heard him questioning the Texas Department of Public Safety director just moments ago. Morgan's there in front of the camera. And Morgan, one of the other details we learned was about how the school resource officer was not on site at the time, which we have learned contradicts what was initially told in the first narrative of this. And in fact, when he did arrive at the scene, he actually drove right by the shooter who was hiding or kneeling behind a vehicle. None of this, the new details we've learned, is going to sit well with the families who are crushed by not just grief, but also now outrage.
Yeah, Peter, you're absolutely right. I mean, you can see the 21 crosses in front of this school now. There is another memorial right in the heart of Uvalde that people are gathering at. Hearing the updates today, if they are true, as we had some facts corrected yesterday, will make this community potentially even more heartbroken, Peter, because you heard that gap that Director McCraw mentioned with DPS. 12:03, they enter the school. 12:15, shields arrive. As many as 19 officers, some with shields, and yet they did not breach that door until 12:50. I also want to point out, Peter, that we've been talking about potential red flags that were raised regarding this 18-year-old gunman prior to this crime, and we're learning a little bit more about some warnings that may not have risen to the level of law enforcement's notice, but certainly existed, that we heard about today. That going back to September of last year, when we're told this gunman asked his sister help to buy a gun. He would have had to have asked for help, Peter, because he still would have been 17 at the point in time, not 18. She said no. And then we're hearing more about this online messaging that took place. We had already heard that there were some Facebook posts. That has now been corrected to Facebook messages on the day of the shooting saying, I'm going to shoot my grandmother. I shot my grandmother. I'm going to shoot a school. Although he did not mention Robb Elementary by name at that time. But prior to this, Peter, we're hearing about communication on one of those online chat rooms in these places in the dark corners of the internet where this is potentially discussed and planned out ahead of time. The director with DPS saying that in February of 28, this school shooting, or not this school shooting, but a school shooting idea was discussed. And then on March 3rd, in a 4-person chat, this 18-year-old responded that he had just bought something. Now, that's important to note, Peter, because if he had actually bought something, it would have been illegal because he still would have been 17. He did not turn 18 until very recently. Peter?
Yeah, Morgan, you detail some of the questions that still remain to be answered. Thank you for your reporting on scene there. NBC News law enforcement analyst and retired Seattle police chief is Carmen Best, and she's joining us now. Chief Best, I think one of the things that folks watching this are struck by is this decision that was made where instead of viewing it as an active shooter situation, it was viewed as a barricaded subject, which means those individuals, those officers, stayed outside the classroom for approaching an hour, more than 40 minutes. Can you help us better understand how decisions like that are made? They follow the active shooter doctrine as it was detailed to us. Go to the gun to enter the room.
Yeah, Peter, you're absolutely right. You know, as a mother and a grandmother, watching this whole thing unfold and the lost lives is so very tragic. And the tactical questions that are coming up, as was noted finally, that the decision to stand by was not the right decision. Clearly on these types of incidents, it's called rapid intervention, rapid response. You know, a team is supposed to, rally up, mount up, go into the building, and immediately go to the target. And that has been said here, but it didn't happen. And that is the real issue. And leadership, I write about this in my book, leadership takes courage. So even if one person in there didn't make the right decision, you would have hoped that someone else would have stepped up and, said, hey, we need to, get a team together and go toward the threat. So I wasn't there. I don't know exactly, but certainly from the outside looking in, it's a tragedy.
Former Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best. Chief Best, we appreciate your time and your expertise on this issue. I think the headline most Americans will read in their papers tomorrow and hear across the newscast this evening is the acknowledgement that it was the wrong decision not to breach those classrooms, that classroom. That concludes our special report. There will be much more this evening on NBC Nightly News. I'm Peter Alexander. Thank you for watching.